Welcome back, you wonderful people. Today's video is going to be about the best piece of advice that I have ever received, that too from a complete stranger. The advice that changed my life in every way imaginable. And I thought since I share a lot of advice with you guys, it would make for a great video if you got insight into some of the advice that I have received in my life. So buckle up, I hope you enjoy this video and let's get started. Now, back in 2015, 2016, I was a very different person. I was still hustling, I was still working really hard, and I wanted to do all of these really cool things like making art and traveling the world and starting my own business. But I was never really doing those things. So back then, I was working as a journalist, and getting chuttis or getting leaves was a really big task. By some miracle, I ended up getting 4 to 5 days off in February, I think, and I decided to take a trip to the Andamans. And it is a magical, beautiful place. So if you do get a chance, please do visit. You will not regret it. So when I was there, I was walking around one evening trying to figure out what activities to do and all of that. And I ended up going to this diving school sort of place. And there I met a scuba instructor. He was this very exotic looking person, dreadlocks, green eyes, had a very memorable face, although I don't remember his name. And I thought that he was from, somewhere in South America or something like that. But turns out that he was from Kerala. He had run away from home at the age of 15 or 16 and come to the Andamans in a fishing boat to take up scuba diving as a profession. His story completely blew my mind. It was so damn inspiring. I was like, whoa. And as we got to talking more, I found out that this guy had been living in the Andamans for over 2 decades. He fell in love with a local woman there, got married to her. Both of them together started a resort, and he took tourists on scuba dives. And during this time, he had worked with deep sea researchers, and he apparently also worked with the crew of Finding Nemo when they came to research clownfish for the movie. He actually showed us a lot of those anemone clownfish when we went deep sea diving with him the next day. It was absolutely mind blowing. I was so inspired by our discussion that day that I ended up asking him, ki, bro, how have you done this? Like, how have you managed to do all of this since the age of 15? Weren't you ever scared? Weren't you ever confused? Weren't you ever doubtful of yourself? All of those things, that we deal with ourselves in today's day and age. And I don't think he was expecting that kind of a question, so it took him a little time to answer. And he said, and I still remember this particular part of the conversation to this day, that doing something is usually very simple. You just show up and do the work. And then he asked me what I wanted to do. And I was extremely confused at that point in time, and I blurted out that I wanted to paint, but I didn't have the time because my job was like night hours and I didn't know how to quit. And then he snapped me out of it. He was like, "You want to paint, right?" I was like, "Yeah." And then he's like, "What do you need to paint?" And my first response was time. And then he's like, "No, but you need like a canvas and colors to paint. Why can't you just get that and start painting?" And in my head, I was like, whoa. He's absolutely right. That's exactly what I'm going to do when I get back home. I remember that at that point in time, this statement, this conversation felt so profound. And then when I went back, I completely forgot about it. Now, here's the thing about advice like this, right? It's very simple to make a statement and say, take the action and do the work. But it's usually very difficult to wrap your head around it or figure out how you actually take the action unless you've seen someone living it. But this guy was actually living his own advice. He was so focused on the action part, he was so focused on just showing up and doing the work that everything else, including the results of it, was background noise. And I can tell you without a doubt that he was one of the happiest people that I had ever met in my life. So a few months after I came back from the trip, I was contemplating quitting my job, and I knew I was miserable. I wanted to do something creative. And I was just sitting and thinking one day, and I had this instant moment of clarity where I remembered this piece of advice, and I was like, yeah, this absolutely makes sense. So I asked myself what I needed to do to actually get started with graphic designing. And I knew that I needed to apply to freelance gigs. And that's what I did. I took action on that part. I just showed up, did the work. I actually ended up getting a freelance gig. And eventually that led me to more gigs. Eventually I quit that job, got a better job. And that led to this chain reaction of things that led me to where I am today. And I was talking to a friend recently when I realized the brilliance of this piece of advice of just showing up and doing the work, because this is the exact thing that I was telling her. But why is it so brilliant? I've summarized about 4 reasons. First, it creates momentum. When you decide to get out of your own head and show up and do the work, that first action that you take creates a sort of chain reaction that dictates every other action that you take after it. But that chain reaction won't happen if you don't take that first action. And eventually, that series of actions create the result that you're striving for. It's basically like a stone rolling downhill. As soon as you tip it over the edge of the mountain, it just continues rolling and gains momentum and speed and becomes like this really fast boulder thing, right? But you need to tip it over the edge for this to work. Second, it creates the antidote to fear. You must have heard the quote that says, "Action is the antidote to fear." You see, when we are contemplating and planning to do something, our mind often conjures up all of the possible scenarios, including the worst case outcomes. And this subconsciously makes us fearful of the outcome itself. And because we're afraid of the outcome, we never end up taking the action. On the other hand, when you start to take action, the mind comes out of thinking mode and goes into action mode and is focused on just completing the next step and the next step and the next step after that. It is kind of like entering flow state or that stone rolling down the hill and gaining momentum. And once you take the action and you see the results, the mind actually realizes that a lot of that fear was just up here and it's not real. Third, it utilizes your knowledge. So our inability to go after our own dreams and our own goals is often rooted in our tendency of trying to be perfect. And I think all of us have faced this at some point in life. Because we want to be perfect before we even start doing something, that prevents us from doing that thing altogether. But when we're focused on taking action rather than just planning and plotting up in our head, it forces us to use our current pool of knowledge, our current pool of skills to make that particular decision. And that helps us realize where our strengths lie, that helps us realize where our weaknesses lie, that helps us understand that there is a lot that we can do with our current skill set, our current knowledge as well. And as a result, we end up making decisions on the basis of real feedback rather than imagined scenarios. And it also helps you realize that perfectionism isn't really the cure to anything. And fourth, it clears confusion. And this has been my favorite result of that advice so far. Because after I quit that first job, I went into a period of rapid experimentation, trying various different freelance gigs, trying various different jobs, networking, making a lot of friends, traveling. And that actually helped me realize my potential, my calling, and eliminate things that did not sit right with me. For instance, I realized that I did not want to take up art as a career, even though earlier I thought that that was the career for me. Because I found out that painting as a hobby was a lot more enjoyable than doing it as a full-time gig that I get paid for. So that's it. That's the advice and why I think it works. I still go back to my old self from time to time where I do get stuck in a non-action taking rut. But I have this piece of advice written down on a piece of paper and stuck to my vision board. So it's there to remind me constantly. And it's also one of the reasons that I have now become more consistent with YouTube and sticking to a weekly schedule here. Let's just take action and see where that leads us. And if the guy who is responsible for this video ends up watching this, thank you so much. You actually did change my life. And you guys watching, let me know what you thought about it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.